Oh, yeah. So yeah, so I had a meeting with a gentleman named Rabbi Asher, who's like one of the main people. He's not the chief rabbi of Israel, but he's definitely in charge of the infrastructure. Yeah, he was. I mean, they're. I mean, they're into it. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's like the way they look at it is like my conversation with him. The way they look at it is like, hey, there's people from all different types of demographics that want to be Jewish or are Jewish, whatever, and want to be accepted by the state. So I mean, the thing is, it's like if I the thing is like this is like I think in anything in business or anything that you do, it's all about knowing who the right person to talk to is for what you're trying to achieve, right? So the reality is is like there's one level where it's like, okay, well, here's a rabbi and we accept his conversions, right? So that's the level that I was talking on yesterday. That's the conversation. But that's not really the conversation because the conversation is much bigger than that. The conversation is, immigration, right? In certain ways, and how does that look? What are we trying to accomplish, right? Because if we're saying that there's say African Americans that want to be Orthodox Jews who are already Orthodox Jews, how do they fit into Israeli society? What's the process of that I won't say acclimatation, I don't know if that's the right word, but that assimilation aspect, right? So it's a broad issue, and then also like what ranges is there? Like, am I limited to African Americans? Is it, you know what I mean? So it's kind of more of a political thing in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
and so I feel like who I was talking to yesterday was like very amazing, and he's 100%. He wants to support, but to really do it the way that I want to, it has to be at a higher level. You know what I'm saying? It has to be with the chief rabbi. It has to be with people that are at a high level, and then also I had to explain to him that the problem that I have now is like normally when people convert to Judaism or whatever, that it's like a basic thing. You know what I mean? It's like you teach, they learn like they learn the halakha, they learn some Jewish history, maybe some Musar type of stuff, but mostly like halakha, how to not break Shabbat, how to not do this, which is fine, and I understand that, but at the end of the day, I'm not dealing with that crowd. You know what I mean? I'm dealing with a crowd of people who are very well versed in the Torah and have an understanding of these things, and and the thing is like a lot of big reasons why I spend a lot of time with Kabbalistic texts is because a lot of times people have to be retaught or taught what it is to even understand what God is, what the world is, what the system is, and the whole thing. And then from there, now this is relevant, right? And that's what made me the person I am. If I would have just went to like some random like conversion process and like sat there and they were saying, on what if you it's Shabbat day, you know what I mean? Like I would have been like, get me out of here. But it was only through the sword, only through the deeper elements, because I was already coming from like a Muslim background. You know what I'm saying? So like for me, what did I care about more laws? You know what I'm saying? What did I care about? Somebody tell me I should pray 3 times a day. These are things that matter to Christians. You know what I'm saying? What empowered me on my journey was to be able to contemplate and reflect on what I've been taught as it related to the system that the Kabbalist, reveals, through our Torah, right? And so then I was able to recalibrate, like, okay, I grew up with this idea of the Islamic calendar, right? So then I write about this in Mind the Black Jew, right? I grew up with the Islamic calendar, right? As a spiritual guide, right? So I already understood the idea of a spiritual calendar. A person who's Christian does not have a spiritual calendar. He has a regular, you know, solar calendar, right? Like everyone else, right? And so the idea of that, and then having holy months too, like Ramadan, all these different things. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like it was like I was new. I mean, meaning that like it wasn't like I came in. I was like, oh, um, wow, there's a Hebrew calendar. Wow, I was in the mindset that those things were like outdated, right? And Islam was bringing the new thing, and there was corruptions that happened and this and blah blah blah. So whatever, but it's still this idea that there were good Jews and Jews have wisdom and these types of things, right? So so what allowed me to transform to becoming a religious Orthodox Jew, right? And it was being able to see what the presentation that I was getting from a frame of Islam, and then compare that to the concept of light and vessel, right? Comparing that to the aspect that Hashem reveals certain lights, throughout the year, right? First you got to start with the calendar system, right? Because calendar is the basis of how we connect to God's system, right? Because He has a certain system where He gives his creation additional lights, and your ability to connect to those lights, in many ways determine your whole life. Connecting to Pesach, connecting to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Could you imagine if these things were like not in your head, right? So that's that point, right? So that you say like, well, where's the Islamic calendar come from? Ah, one of the Khalifa guys came up with it. Well, why did he come up with it? Ah, because he thought it was better than the Hebrew calendar. Maybe that's what he thought. I don't know. I don't know what the thinking was. I haven't read his writings, but it wasn't their prophet. Muhammad. He never told them to create it. You know what I'm saying? So it's just saying that, and it's like, and if you say you follow David and Solomon and all these different prophets and Isaiah, all these people, they all function on the solar lunar calendar, right? They all function on it. The leap year, the whole thing, right? Because it's the only way. Because Judaism, the Torah, Israel, our relationship with God is built around seasons, right? And so you can't have Pesach in the summer, right? You can't have Sukkot in the winter, right? And if you don't have a leap year system, then you don't have a seasonal mechanism. You know what I'm saying? So this is the same system that King Solomon used, right? So the thing is saying like, okay, so the calendar system with the light that all the prophets used was like this. So someone comes and creates a new system. What's the mechanism? How do you saying there's a new system of Shefa? If so, explain what happened. How did it happen? Right? And then you go into other things, like even the books, like who wrote the books? He didn't write the book. I thought he wrote. Nah, he had teachings, and then they compiled his teachings later, and because it was written on leaves and rocks and this and the whole thing. So there's people compiled it, but a lot of people memorized it. And so all these people memorized it, and then they all agreed that this was this thing, and they came up with it. I was like, okay, that's interesting, but why didn't their prophet do that when he was alive? Okay, fine, he didn't do it. All right, so the book, but even in the beginning of when they compiled the first Quran, there was different versions of it. It wasn't one exact version. Then a Khalifa came and got rid of all the other ones and standardized it, right? Right, and so again, I'm not here criticizing. I'm just like, well, how does that connect to the light force of the Creator, right? And when you say the Hadith, wow, the Hadith came 250 years after the death of their prophet. Okay, well, was the guy who did it? Was he like a sage? No. His name was Bakari. He was a historian, and he went around Mecca and Medina, and he asked people, "Hey, what about this? What about that? What about this?" And he wrote it down. That became the Hadith. So when I look at that structure, right? Wow. When I look at that structure, right? When I look at that structure, then I have to say to myself, I get it. If it works for people, it works for people. But I just need to understand how it's connected to the light of the Creator. That's where I'm at. I just want to know what the light is. Just tell me. I'm not dissing you. I don't have a problem. Bro, I went to Mecca with these questions, bro. I went to Hajj. You know what I'm saying? Like I made Hajj on this. I lived in Mecca for like almost like 2 months. Mecca, Medina. I did that. I was in Egypt. You know what I'm saying? I met with scholars and imams, these people with these same questions. So, and that was, the process. Very few people you'll meet in world history will made Hajj and convert to Judaism. You know what I'm saying? And it's not like I came from a family, bro. I come from excellent people. You know what I'm saying? So, anyways, the point is just saying that it was through the wisdom of Kabbalah, the teachings of Rav Ashlag, the teachings of the Ari, right? With the teaching of Rav Chaim Vital, the teaching of Rav Berg, the teachings of Rabbi Brandwein. That's what I was getting hit with at 21 years old, right? 22 years old. That's what I was getting hit with. And then so all those questions came out of that. And when I went on that journey of discovering myself, I came back with the conclusion that the Torah was the only thing, right? For the level of soul that my life for I needed. So the point is just saying that. So I had to explain to the Rob, like, in order for people to, in ways, get away from the idolatry thinking, right? Because it's like you could bring that idolatry thinking into Judaism, right? And your whole thing is wearing an outfit, and you got a strimal on, you got the big jackets, and you this, whoa, whoa, and it's a spectacle because there's no depth in the Torah, right? There's no depth in learning. There's no depth in any of these things. So, anyways, it's not to criticize, anybody or any religion. I love Muslims. I love the Muslim people. I have Muslim relatives. My parents are Muslim. You know what I mean? So I'm not coming from that, but I'm just saying, like, my parents gave me tools to think, and so did, God gave me tools to think. So, anyways, so it's difficult because people in the traditional structure, see me talking about Kabbalah and Kabbalistic ideas, and all that. They'd be like, oh, that's a surah to teach, Gentiles Kabbalah, right? And it's true, but I don't. The people that I'm teaching, I don't see them as Gentiles. I see them as Tinok Shenishba, as people who come from Israelite tribes that were subjected, right? And they have kept their oral tradition, right, for hundreds of years, right? And it's no different than any other group of people, right? There's people you go to a lecture for outreach for people who are connected or people who barely identify as Jew. They're teaching Kabbalistic ideas. I went to Isha Torah, in Los Angeles. They're teaching Kabbalistic ideas. So we're not going into the Zohar. We're not doing these things. No, but we need these concepts to break the klipa that is trapping the soul from not achieving its potential, right? So, anyways, so it's just so you have to explain that to people, because that's not the traditional way of looking at things. It's like dumbing it down, and if a person shows that they can live in the Jewish community and make friends and get invited by people for Shabbat, and other Jews feel comfortable with them, and they have a basic grasp of halakha, okay, put them in the mikveh. They could be Jewish. They could join our community. All right, but that means that's all it's about. Anyways, so I had to explain to him that, hey, I'm doing things that are not mainstream, right? And the yeshiva and places that I went to, they're not going to be endorsing it. You know what I'm saying? They're not going to be like, yeah, man, you're doing good. They don't even teach those guys well. You know what I'm saying? Their whole life is Gemara, which is fine. I mean, I love the Gemara. Gemara's Kabbalah too. It just depends what perspective you learn it from, right? It's also right, but the point is, especially in Agada, right? And so the point is just saying that. So I had to explain that to him, and he understood. And it's also things that I do that are not so like traditional. I mean, I've been in Israel for 8 years, and Israel is one of those places that you know you have to keep growing in your Torah, or you're going to suffer. You can't stay at the same place. I can't be at the same level as I was in yeshiva, and just every day I'm waking up and going to base midrash. I'm in a base midrash. My house is a base midrash now. You know what I mean? And I'm teaching all over the world, right? I wasn't there, 3, 4 years ago. You know what I'm saying? So it's just saying, like, you have to keep growing. And so now, I connect to the Temple Mount. I don't go to the places that are forbidden to us. I go on the outside with rabbis and frum Jews and all these different things, and we follow all the halachot. So, that's also not mainstream. You know what I'm saying? And so people could look at them and be like, oh, you go to the Temple Mount, so, but my soul, that's what my soul is at. I'm obviously built differently than you. That's how I'm here in the first place, right? My excellence is an expression of how I'm here to begin with, right? So the fact people have been seeing me for years go to Kever Siddiqui. They see me like probably over 100 times, at places at Marza Mekpela, Kever Rachel, right? Spots, different places, and so different places throughout Jerusalem, different Kavari, Har Menukos, right? Har Menucha, right? And just saying all these places. So I graduated to around the Temple Mount. You know what I'm saying? So it's just saying like, so I'm doing things that are not considered mainstream. And the thing is, I don't care. I don't want to be a part of the mainstream. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't see that as any benefit. Like the mainstream institutions would not allow me to have the influence to create the changes that I want to see in the world. You know what I mean? And so I have to do things independently. That's why I'm with the Chief Rabbinate of Africa and under the leadership of Rabbi Pinchas Eliyahu Shaddai, who's a Mikubal, who's higher than any of the rabbis I have ever learned from, right? And so from that space, I'm good. And there's rabbis all over the world that I'm connected to in this network and all support my agenda in what we're doing and everything I do empowers them, So Hashem provides, but the whole mainstream thing is whack, bro. They like sitting up there, they're like looking at fools like they're like entertainment. You know what I'm saying? Like you come on, your entertainment. Oh, my story, we did this, and you try to and the thing about these people don't even realize the real mind side. These people see you as like, I see you that, you know what I mean? We know you didn't learn no Torah, though. You know what I'm saying? We know like you ain't to put that grind on. You can put on a black hat all you want and all this stuff. But it's like we know you ain't did that, but it's entertaining to see you doing it. If that's what the level you want to be at, shkoyach. Great. You want to be on the entertainment level and you say, hey, you want to pretend, bro, break it down. Break it, be that guy, then go on TV. Be that guy, then go and talk on podcasts. You know what I'm saying? Don't talk on the podcast and then try to work to be that guy. You know what I'm saying? I was in yeshiva almost 4 years before I even went on TV once, and it wasn't even my thing. You know what I'm saying? You saw it on Facebook. So the point is just saying, so those are the dilemmas, and it's a great segue into the learning we're doing today, which is this idea of thinking about what it is to build a spiritual community, right? What is it to live in a frame of truth, and have people around you without being subjugated, without being controlled, but at the same time having a central authority that is based around ideas, right, and people that implement those, right, and that's what the rabbinate of America, is going to do because it's the Americas, right? It's the Caribbean and it's Canada, right? Those are my regions, right? And so we got to do that, right? And I'm starting with the African American community, but we everybody, bro, even the white boys in the South, they got to come to Cuba. You know what I'm saying? So it's just saying that we started with African Americans, but it's not limited. It's the Geula. All the souls that need to be redeemed come through, but we got to work in sections. You know what I'm saying? And because sometimes you bring people from other cultures in, and they're very scared of seeing African American progression. It makes them nervous. And so we need our own isolated space, and that. So anyway, so let's go into it. Hold on. Yeah, bro, it's big stuff, big lights going on, big heavy stuff. I'm like, oh my God, it's just like one thing after another. But it's all good, but it's no joke. Ain't no joke. It's not for the weak. All right. All right. So let's go into the Sefer and let's build out. Is it the Pleskil Rebbe? Okay, so we're back in Bnei Machshava Tov, right? And so now we went into the general idea in the beginning, right? In the introduction, and basically we talked about this, what we just talked about earlier, a safe space where people can work on their tikkun and feel safe doing it, right? And so here's a structure that he created for that to manifest. Ha pesuk meyasar ed Israel ve omer. So he says. So he brings the pasuk from Deuteronomy. He said the key thing is overcoming our forgetfulness. Okay, so he's saying forgetfulness is the main thing. The Jewish people were rebuked for having forget. The Jewish people were rebuked for having forgotten God, who formed you. Zehu ikar hasiba Hashem rachet et adamim Elochav. He says, and through this he said, this forgetfulness is the principal factor that distance people from God. Uve tefilatod shel Rabbi Elimelech. So you remember saying about Rav Zusha and Elimelech? He's quoting him right here.
Hmm.
So he says the prayers in the prayer that he composed, Elimelech of Legins stated, "May our mind be pure, clean, clear, and strong." Bekol ish yode'am she be'ima haya maroe. So he says, everyone knows that if he were to literally see with his own eyes that he is standing before God, he would cease to have any evil inclination. Therefore, he would put forth his entire spirit and soul in holy words to God until he became nothing and be absorbed into God. So he's saying basically any Jew that knows anything about the halakha, the rules, the system in which we're born with, and even non-Jews to an extent, like if they saw Hashem, God or the Creator, standing in front of, I mean, don't say that because those JC people start getting excited. If they understood that the presence of Hashem was in front, they would never sin. So he says, but if we do not have to go so far, everyone feels his evil inclinations cease to exist, even if he has no more than focuses his mind and thought strongly upon God. He says, so if a person feels the Yitzhar Hara, they feel like they're going to sin, they feel like they're getting tempted. He said, focus your mind upon God. He says, then all of the poison which bubbles through his senses is nullified before God. For example, Yom Kippur, particularly during Kol Nidre, which is like the apex, in Ne'ilah, like the apex. And he says, doesn't every Jew feel like all the lusts, fantasies, and improper desires no longer exist, since at that moment his thought is clear and strongly focused on God, right? So he's saying like anybody we've all had those experiences where we felt so close to God, or we had those experiences. For Yom Kippur is definitely a great example. And we have those experiences towards the end of Yom Kippur after that whole day of fasting. And it's like, wait, that's it. I want Mashiach now. That's it. I don't feel anything. There's no hunger. There's this. I just want to be free. My neshama wants to be free. And he's saying there's no thought of sin then, right? And even after Yom Kippur, most normal people are not thinking about sin. Kol ikar chisharon l'shel nifalat ha'adam hu. So he says the very essence of imperfection caused by our own human descent is that you forgot God who formed you. So he's going back to that pasuk and saying like, hey, that's the root of all of our mistakes is that we forget that God created us. A person descends from mindfulness, is not always pure, clear, strong, and it is Yom Kippur and other such times. Even if someone wanted to strengthen and empower his mind and thought, he could not maintain this mindfulness consistently for any consecutive period of time. So he says, וכיוון שכן כל עבודתנו צריכה להיות איך. So he says, and in all of the work, in all of our work must center on how to strengthen our mindfulness, how to broaden it, empower it, perfect it, and bind it to God. And not only during such times as the shofar blowing on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but so that is that way always be clear, strong in holiness. So he's creating a foundation of thought, right? And so these are some of the principles that we're starting. So one principle, he says that the community has to be focused on this idea of forgetfulness, right? Forgetfulness is that vehine lefi ha'emet. So this is the second part. So forgetfulness is a principle, right? So we got to remind each other Hashem exists, and we have to create mechanisms and systems that we can work together, like couples, families, everyone, right? Vehine lefi ha'emet. So this is a working upon one's mind, right? So the first level is forgetfulness, which is part of the in the Machshava, right? And then the second part is working on one's mind. Ideally, the service of mindfulness should begin from below and rise upwards. In other words, a person should purify his body, then his thoughts will automatically be purified and strengthened. But one should not begin by working on one's mind. Aval be dorot maharishonim. So he says he says it also in earlier generations, people begin by working on and purifying their bodies, having completely purified their bodies so that they experience a body that is subservient to holiness. And they should strive at the work and purification of mindfulness. This was the superior path. So we know through the teachings of the sages that the body is rooted in the desire to receive for oneself alone, right? And so what we're saying is here is that in essence he's speaking about this idea of the soul correction, as we know, right? That's why you have to understand that he says it, but you have to understand. He's saying, okay, so what does it mean purify the body? Right? If the body is rooted in the desire to receive, what does it mean to purify our body? And we know that when we are resurrected, that we're going to get a new body, right? So what is this idea of purifying the body? And so he says that the experiential body that's serving the holiness. So this goes into the power of the soul, right? So one of the things is that as a mechanism, when we're resurrected from the dead, the sages ask the question, well, if when we're resurrected from the dead, why does the sages, the Kabbalah say that we're going to have our old bodies, right? And then we're going to be given a new body, right? Why give us our old body? He said, because the soul is going to be perfected. And so when the perfected soul, goes into that body, and it's able to fuel all those 248 limbs and in those 635 organs, that the perfection of that soul is going to perfect that body and is going to make that body have the desire to receive of that body will disappear, and that body will be a body completely as a frame of sharing. This is not what he's saying, but nevertheless, we can understand the idea of the level of wanting to purify our body. But it's not a complete purification that only happens during the times of Mechaye Hamatim. Lo kin ata bedor shel bata dimasicha. So he says like this. However, now in our generation of the heels of the Mashiach, he was saying that during times of the Holocaust. He says a generation of heels. Not this is not so. Our bodies are weak, and this is the cause of the lack of self-control, an inability to rule over ourselves and our body. If in these days a person were to begin his service by purifying and sanctifying his body, he would obtain nothing. His body would not be purified, and certainly not his thoughts, which he would never even touch upon or attempt to purify and strengthen. His body would remain in a state of dwarfness and darkness and repent. I mean, repent. I don't know, and reject, right? And reject it, right? So again, he's talking about this idea of the sanctity, right? And he's saying that we're at the time of the Mashiach, and he says our bodies are weak and we lack self control. In the in these days we have to begin the process of purifying our body, purifying our souls. And he says the body. He said he said his body would not be purified, and certainly not his thoughts, which he would never even touch upon or attempt to purify and strengthen. So yeah, he's just showing what we already know, right? We're learning Ramchal. We know, we're learning, Shari Kedusha. We get it. Lechen serikima lehat kil et havoda. She says, in thus we begin our work with mindfulness. Ule tachalit zo karanu ed tenu. So he says, and so we all have called our group the Society of Positive Mindfulness. Okay? So this is what he's saying. He's saying he was talking about mindfulness, interesting, in the 1940s, right? Right? It is the purpose to, so he called his Society of Positive Mindfulness, right? Bnei Machshava Tov, right? So its purpose is to strengthen and reveal the good thoughts within us. It's interesting. It to perfect it and expand it and expand it so that it not remain a wistfully momentary flash of a spark of that is swiftly extinguished, but that it will become pure and strong until it will subjugate the entire body, until it will sublime all the bodily senses, appearing and ruling in us. Okay, so this is a very important point because he's basically saying that the society that he created was all based around consciousness. And it was around this idea of consciousness where they understood that the more you transform the mind, the more the reality and the closeness to God manifest, right? And he's saying, but the way to get to that place is this process of a purifying of the body, which is interesting because so much of what we've been learning in the Sod, in the Kabbalah, is basically saying, the body is what it is. You got to deal with it. You got to deal with it. But one day you're going to get a new body. But he's actually addressing even the body in its limited state because he knows the same Torah we know, right? So he's addressing it in a limited state. He says, "Ki maha'im kol isha mita kadesh kol gifot pit om." He says, "I will demonstrate that we do not first have to sanctify our bodies. Does every individual suddenly sanctify his entire body right after the shofar blowing on the Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah? Certainly not. Nevertheless, we see that a strong thought can even subjugate and sanctify the body that has not been sanctified." Ooh. So he says, I will demonstrate how we do not first have to sanctify our body. Okay. So he's saying, so I'm a little bit confused because I thought he said earlier that part of the Machshava element is, the body is the purification of the body, right? He says you start below and you work yourself up, right? And he says, but I'll demonstrate here we do not have to first start with the sanctifying of our body. And he used Yom Kippur and that spiritual experience to explain that. So we're trying to understand his thinking. He says, Lama ze na'azov et ha-machshava im ruach. So he says, and if that's the case, why should we allow mindfulness and his mighty spirit to sleep and rot in its lethargy within ourselves? Okay. So I think he's saying that the starting of the process of the purification of the body is understanding that the power still starts in the makshava, right? It still starts in the mind, it still starts in our thoughts. So he the next level, he comes in and he says, Sheikh Halu, Shi Tuchal Vekizuk. Okay, so he says the need to strengthen mindfulness. The perfection is broadening the strengthening of mindfulness is the fundamental concern of our group. The perfection, broadening, and the strengthening of mindfulness is the fundamental concern of our group. And the principal method by means of which we will be able to obtain a link with the service of God. Then we will not only be like the maiden's firstborn, standing behind the milestones and far from the king, but we'll be like the king's son, who feels how close he is to his father, and in the sense of his father speaking to him. So that's the key. He said the main focus in the group is help strengthening consciousness, right? That's the main point of it. Vehine kol ikar kushayata vekovet. So he says, why is the obtainment of such mindfulness so difficult and wearisome? Why does a person find it hard to strengthen this mindfulness and not allow it to weaken him? There's two reasons for this. So you hear the question. So why is obtainment of such mindfulness so difficult and tiresome? And it says, and why does a person find it hard to strengthen his mindfulness and not allow it to become weakened? So one is actually obtaining mindfulness. The other one is maintaining it. It says ha der hit ore root bein ha hit lita havut shel mashimcha uvein shel shaved by Barat Halev. So he says the first cause of the lack of passion, whether it's flaming joy or of a broken heart, when a Jew purifies himself, he's a flame. Even the most modest awakening strengthens and purifies his mindfulness. Because of it, to transcend his physical image and the illusion, as we have showed earlier on Yom Kippur. Raka kashali bot umochot. So he says lacks in a person lacks in elevation, non-physical mindfulness only when his heart and mind are dull. This is particular so in the case of depression. Heaven forbid, depression is not a broken and bitter heart. It is rather a type of lacking and a dullness. Oh wow. The Alter Rebbe. This is the Rabbi Shneur Zalman. So he says like this. He said this is particular. So in the case of depression, heaven forbid, depression is not a broken and bitter heart. It is rather a type of lacking in dullness. He says from the eve of Yom Kippur, when a Jew feels that his heart is broken and his heart and mind are open, whereby he during the rest of the year he is depressed and he seeks into lower and lower, lacking both the heart mind. So he's saying like, how do we have these moments of major inspiration and then we go into depression, right? Right? How do we deal with that? How do we deal with this idea of not falling into that? Because that's when we make our sins, right? Oh, I don't care anymore. I'm so, I make me feel better. I'm hurting. I'm suffering. ועוד חישרון יש בו והוא מום טבעי she'in. So he said the second cause is that a person naturally lacks this strong mindfulness. When he encourages someone to strengthen his mindfulness, it is as if we are going to tell someone something complex to a person of limited intelligence who, due to his natural limitations, cannot understand it. A person's mindfulness is by nature not as strong as it should be. Even at the time of the spiritual awakening, although then it does not awaken and grow stronger, it is like the understanding of a person of limited intelligence who has obtained strains of his mind and understanding with some information with with his diminished understanding, all of this mindfulness exists only at the inspired moments and afterward, and afterwards disappears. Okay. Okay, so let's understand this. Okay, so the second cause is the lack of strength, right? So when you encourage someone and say you encourage someone to strengthen his mindfulness, right? So that's to be the basis of the organization. It is as if we thought to tell someone complex something complex. So you said like, no, we got to expand our consciousness, right? Because that's what he's saying. He's saying mindfulness. I say consciousness, right? And so he says something complex to a person of limited intellect. So he says it sounds like that when you say expand your consciousness. Who do to this natural limitation cannot understand it. A person's mindfulness is by nature not as strong as it should be, even though at a time of spiritual awakening, though does not awaken in spiritual growth. It is like the understanding of a person of limited intelligence. So he's saying that like when we go on this journey, one of the parts that really limits our ability to build this mindfulness is that we don't accept our level, right? In essence, we're accepting other people's levels, right? We're accepting, you know, were we not, right? And so this idea of expansion, we become intimidated, right? He says a person mindfulness by nature is not strong as it should be, even at the times of spiritual awakening, right? So he's saying it is like it's like the understanding a person of limited intellect. So that's what he's saying. He said you're finding it. He says some information was with his is diminished understanding. All of this mindfulness is this only at the inspired moments and after it disappears. So he's saying these moments of inspirations, like they say, like, man, I got hyped, and then I just fell off or I faded out, right? Kelomar ha'ish ba'alam makshava chazak so he says, but if a person possesses a strong mindfulness when he awakes and is inspired, his mind he's inspired, his mind strengthens and it's clear, and it is taught in his mind's eye, the mind's eye of the Jewish people who are the children of prophets. See God be he, blessed be he, in his throne of glory, each person on his level, even afterwards, even he is no longer aflamed, he can access his previous state of mind without letting it weaken, and see again God's glory standing before him. The strong mindfulness that he controls can again awaken this flame whenever he prepares himself. So it's an interesting point because on Sukkot, one of the concepts of Sukkot, one of the mitzvahs of Sukkot is to be happy. So the sages speak on this and they say, well, if a person could be happy, if it's a commandment to be happy, that means we have the power to make ourselves happy. We have the power to create inspiration. I knew this guy, his name was Kenny something. I remember, but when I went to Kabbalah, he was an older guy, and he's an older guy, and he's an older guy, and he basically would told me this thing he used to do when he was in sales. He said he would be in the office and just start jumping up and down, to create energy. Ma she'in kin ba'al hamum be'lo makshava. He said, but if this is not the case with the blemished person who lacks mindfulness, even when he is awakened and its flames, although the mindfulness is a mere spark, comparable to the mind of a fool. How much more is it true when he's no longer inspired, when he lacks every type of elevated thought, and he can only of this worldly matters, bread, potatoes, and the likes. Therefore he can be inspired only for these inspirations that come on itself on Yom Kippur or other times. Then he awakes, but he is incapable of activating awakeness, his inspiration in his mind and in the elevation himself. So it's an interesting point. He's saying so it's like this. When a person lacks mindfulness, right, they can have moments of inspiration, right? But it's short and temporary, right? It's like guys. I mean, they pursue pleasures. Like say they want a woman, right? Oh man, I want a woman, right? So they go out, they have sex with the woman, excuse my language, and then what? You know, if they don't have any feelings for that woman, they don't love that woman, then what? All they can do is go and look for another experience, right? But if they love that woman, then that experience that they have will lead into a much deeper and deeper relationship, right? So he's saying by the same way, like when we have, he says when we think when our minds are in a limited consciousness, when we're thinking about material things, material gains, whatever, which we have to have, right? Because we have to be able to perform those mitzvahs as well. But he said, but that's when that dominates the person. He's saying that the person cannot achieve the level of mindfulness. And if you can't achieve a level of mindfulness, you're going to have those fleeting experiences, just like the guy who doesn't love the girl, right? Mindfulness is in the frame of love right now, right? And so the more mindful you are, when you make those connections, they last and they go deeper and deeper and deeper because you're able to understand and you're able to expand. This is the basis of Torah learning, right? But if you don't have that love, if you don't have that mindset, you'll crash, right? He says, then he awakens. She said, all right, therefore he can be inspired only when this inspiration comes of itself on Yom Kippur or on other days. So when it's created by the physical reality. He says, then he awakens, but he is incapable of awakening his inspiration in his mind and of the elevating himself. So he says, principle number 4, exercising mindfulness. Ba'alama, be'emet. He said, but really, why isn't our mindfulness strong? Hello, Machshava na shechel no amer alav she'in lo mocha v'shebachel chad. So he says, after all, mindfulness is not intellect. Smart is a big point. A person may lack a bright and keen intellect, but this has nothing to do with mindfulness, nor is mindfulness intellectually gymnastics to analysis. Ooh, to the contrary, we are only seeking simple faith in God, in that this faith not be hidden in unconscious within us. He believes in Hashem and he considers it. But this verse may also be translated. He believes in Hashem and he himself considers. In other words, he himself meditates upon his beliefs. We wish to meditate upon our faith with a breath of thought that will fill our entire body, as we will later discuss. So this is the power of mindfulness, right? He's saying like, don't get into these words. When we talk about consciousness, mindfulness, all these things, it's not like this is like high genius science, consciousness, mindfulness. Whoa, he said no. He says we are only seeking simple faith in God, and that this faith is not hidden to the unconscious within us. It says in Genesis, he believed in Hashem and he considered it. This verse may also be translated, he believed in Hashem and he himself considered. In the other words, he himself meditated upon his beliefs. We wish to meditate upon our faith with a breath of thought that will fill our entire body. Okay, so that's the idea, right? The more we contemplate God, actually, I was going to write Rabbi Pinchas a note and ask him about this idea of Chief Rabbi Pinchas about how does a person because it's something I've been thinking about. Like, how does a person think about God when they're not studying, right? And I have ideas. I just wanted to hear his perspective because he has a lot of sources and he has his own, you know, like divine inspiration, right? And so because it's like I think about it, I go outside and I mean I'm looking at everything, but sometimes your mind goes somewhere else, right? So how do we think about Hashem when we Ve'lama te'adir lo leishta Israel shehu mi bane. So he says, and since every Jew is descended from prophets, why should any of us lack this type of imagination or mindfulness? The answer is simply that we have not properly used and exercised it. This is like a physical ability. If you do not use it and examine it, it will be weakened. More than that, since we use our body and senses to take care of our needs, but if we do not employ the spiritual mindfulness to transcend in imagining of our body and our physical endeavors, overwhelm our thoughtfulness. So it's an interesting idea because we're talking about the safarim, for the yeshiva, right? And the safarim for the yeshiva is the safarim for the yeshiva is excuse me. The safarim for the yeshiva is actually when he's talking about how to build mindfulness. This is what the Ramchal is teaching. This is what Rav Chaim Vital is teaching. It's the same thing: mindfulness, zealous, completish, I mean, all these type of things, right? Completion, right? We're learning about that. How the mitzvahs, all these things. This is what we're doing already, But he's reaffirming that how important this is in terms of building a community. He says, "Uva daver keze misha tamashim gama harofiim ale lechalush ha'asebim." So he says, when a person has a nervous condition because his thought process are damaged, physical advice. Okay, when a person has a nervous condition, but his thought processes are damaged, physicians advise him to engage only in physical activities without thinking in order to calm his nerves. Even his thoughts of the physical things shrink and becomes less sensitive. Right. So he's saying like when a person has a nervous condition, they've had some situation and they have they're having nightmares, they're having paranoid thoughts, they're having these things. He said the physician would tell them to only engage in physical activity, go and play a sport, go jogging, go and give to the homeless, right? And he says by then that anxiety and that thinking process shrinks. Vekavan shekina shekasheru sima anu. So he says, and when we wish to take a great step from the lowliness of the body to the work of the mindfulness, we simply need to just bring forth and reveal within ourselves a new and strong mindfulness. What is Ramchal saying when he says watchfulness? What is Ramchal saying when he says zeal? What is Ramchal saying when he talks about cleanliness? He's talking about mindfulness. Those are the ingredients and the systems to attain what this Rebbe is speaking about right now. And that's why it's so important to have a broad understanding, because then you can start connecting the dots, because every Jew has an aspect of the intellect of God, right? And we see that in our teachings. And so when we're able to piece these things together, we're able to put together a collage and understand what people are actually saying to us. But if I just read this book, I'll say, okay, mindfulness, mindfulness, mindfulness. I'll Google mindfulness. Okay. And he says, and to experience it, just as bringing forth a child's ability to walk by practice. Vehaya shokarenu bazeh. She says we gain a double reward. Not only will a supernatural mindfulness that we never had before since be revealed to us, but since we are working on mindfulness, the poisons, the strengthening it, the poisons of the body senses will weaken. When just as the physical work weakens thought, and these physical senses will and these physical senses will themselves be transformed into the sense of these physical senses will themselves be transformed into the sense of the mind. So there's a certain thing, with that, right? And okay, so if we could stop here, if you want, we could continue on at 20 o'clock on this, or we could do halakha. But just right now, we'll stop here. But we could continue on this evening because I'm not going out. It's like a rainstorm.
Mm. Um, I have an interview at 11, so it would have to be a little later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we'll play by ear. We'll play by ear.
Yeah,
Anyways,
but
so thoughts, reflections on the society.
yeah, I like it. It kind of reminds me of a few things. One, like how the Yud is the beginning of everything. You know what I mean? That small dot. It's like mindfulness, focusing on mindfulness, it permeates through the rest of your body. And it kind of goes back to some of the first, shares we were having. We were
Mm,
talking about waking up with
yeah.
Modern Faneka, right? You
Mm,
wake up and you create that channel to allow, Hashem to come to your mind. First thing, it's the first thing that you do. So it's like mindfulness allows you to purify your body. It purifies everything around you. You know what I mean? It creates the vessel to receive Hashem's light. So it makes sense. It's just the tools needed. Can you please stop? Um, it's just the tools needed for us to connect to Hashem in the way that we need to. The thought, like that's why the head is above the rest of the body. When
mm.
Yaakov Avinu, when he laid, with the stones, he put the stone under his head. His head was elevated than the rest of his body. So like it starts with the mind. It starts with the thought process. And mindfulness, zealousness, cleanliness, all these things are vessels, And I need to find it in the Midrash says in Better Sheets, but I believe that it talks about like Hashem created the head first, I believe. Maybe. But I don't know. But
Wait,
even
what'd you say? Say it again. The midrash. What?
in the Midrash says I need to check in Better Sheets. Like, does it say that Hashem created the head first? Is that a concept in there?
Yeah, it talks about, yeah, it does say the head first actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Midrash Rabbah. It talks about when God put together man, he first formed his head from the
Mhm.
land of Eretz Israel, and then the body he took from other parts of the world. Yeah, you're right.
So just it starts with the mind, it starts with the head, and with the skull. We go into the Kabbalistic principles. You know, um, so if we, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. It makes sense.
Wait, this funny story you just reminded me of. So yesterday when I was meeting with the rabbi at the at the at the rabbinu, talking about all the different ideas, so I was explaining to him my curriculum. And I said to him, so I said now I'm like getting into like blended learning. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, yeah, like he said, like for example, I'm doing like Mishalat Yesharim, Path of the Just, and Shar Hakadusha. Right? They're
Mm-hmm.
both Musar Safers, but one is dealing in the frame of system, and another one is dealing in the dynamic of area, right? And so bringing together, he was just like, okay, but he was like, bro, like he's like, you're different, bro. Because I told him, I was like, yeah, I'm doing like maybe like close to like 3 or 4 classes a day. He's like, what? I'm like, yeah. So I'm doing like close to 3 or 4 classes a day, which is like close to like 20 something a week, type of thing, and just like he was just blown away because anyway, he heard about it. He already looked me up the whole thing. So, anyways, we're pushing forward, man, and at the end of the day, you know, the main reason, why, I want to work with the Rabbanut on some type of level is because I just want to be able to give people the option if they want to come to Israel. You know what I mean? If they want to come and live, I want to just be in that, and they don't and make it easier for them and create a situation where the country is receiving them and they have built-in programs for. They have these things already. They have OPON. They have these things that allow people to simulate. But I also want to be able to cohort that into the job market, right? Where people could come and assimilate in the workforce, right? Because that's one of the biggest challenges here is that when people immigrate here, yeah, they may be excited, they may have some money saved and that, but that's it. You know what I mean? And so, that Israel thing is just like, if you're going to come, you should be able to. If you work in tech, if you work in finance, if you work in these things, that there should be systems that help Americans, integrate into Israeli system much better, right? And I'm saying specifically by African Americans. There's a special relationship African American Orthodox Jews, right? And being able to set up situations where they're able to not just make aliyah and become citizens, but also not just assimilate learning in OPON, but also the workforce too, right? And having systems set up where companies are looking to hire these particular type of skill set workers and these type of things. So it's not just a conversion issue, and that's all he was talking about. And the more I was talking to him, I realized like the Robin is not really the person to talk to. It's really more about the Ministry of Interior, a Minister of Diaspora, these types of people, because we're talking about social integration, not just conversion to Judaism. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I realized out of that. So the Robin is good, and he was trying to like be kind of like talk to me in the frame, like, I could help you out, I could help you work with the Robinhood, and they could refer students to you. And I was like, no, I'm too radical for that. I'm too radical. You don't want me. You don't want that. You don't want that. My students, we're on salt, man. We're ready. We're fasting. Like we're not. We're just getting started. You know what I mean? Like we're on a different derek. Anyways, um, hmm?
It reminds me of Rob Pincus, Chief Rabbi Pincus, the
Hmm.
Torah Aleph, like the highest level. You know what I mean? We're not
That's where
coming.
we're at.
Yeah, we're going, and that's how it was. You know what
That's
I
what
mean?
it was. Exactly.
Yeah.
This is our heritage.
Kind of like when we was reading about the Hasidus. They're saying like we're not strong enough to fast anymore. Like the body's been weakened. And
Yeah,
it's
but
like,
it's a different community.
yeah,
It's a different
that's,
community, different vessel,
mhm.
different. Rather, Pincus has a whole thing of explaining how you could understand the level of desire through melanation. Very controversial,
Ooh.
very controversial. And he won't teach it publicly. He said,
Mhm.
but if I want to get a small group together, he'll come and talk about it. So we get
Mhm.
a few people together, he'll come maybe like I have like 6 or 7 people. He'll come and talk about melanation. But anyways, it's a whole thing. I shouldn't even said that. But anyways, the point is just saying that we're all connected.
Mhm.
We're all one soul. Some communities are stronger in some areas than others. That was the whole basis of the 12 tribes, and we're understanding ourselves on a soul level. Some tribes were higher spiritually. Some were more better at generating wealth. Some were better at fighting. There was just different levels, and sometimes there was crossover, right? So it's not a diss. It's just saying that for us, perhaps our tikkunim is different than some of our other brothers by definition, right? And so we may want to do. Robert Pincus holds by this. He holds by Shaleg and all this stuff and whatever. Anyways, so we can continue on, but okay. So on your interview, um, when you are when you're going to the interview, it's kind of like a Michael Jordan type of moment where you could take a time, whether it's now in the morning, now or later, where you kind of like maybe kind of like visualize the meeting, right? Mike J will like visualize the game, right? So that's one element. But when you visualize it, you should visual when you're visualizing it, visualize the room. It may not be the same exact room you go into, but imagine but visualize that room having seeing the Hebrew letters in that room, right? And certain names of God and certain names of Siddiqim, right? Like prophets, like Moshe, Yitzhak, Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, these names, imagine those names being in that room, right? So when you're talking in there, you already sent angels ahead of time. Just like Yaakov sent angels to Esau ahead of time, you can send angels to the room that you're going to talk into, right? And so you do that by visualizing it. This is exactly what Yaakov did by Esau, right? And those angels are there, and they're going to take your words, and they're going to take your words and your energy, and they're going to place it into that person's heart and soul. So they're going to feel you. They're going to feel connected to you. They're going to feel safe with you. But it's the angels, right? So you want to just visualize that. You want to just visualize that dynamic, and those angels will protect you if there's harm there too as well, right? Because the key thing is you want the right decision, not the decision, the right decision, right? And so when you go to the interview, it's just that you just send the angels, and then you just do your regular thing, and they'll do the rest for you.
Man.
Baruch atah.